Hello, everybody, and welcome into another season preview show here at the Hockey Bears YouTube channel. I'm your host, Matthew Zator, and we are up to the LA Kings here with our previews as we get closer and closer to the regular season starting. And I've got a couple writers here that don't normally cover the Kings, but they are pretty close to them, covering one of their rivals. So I got Alex Hutton and William Espy here. Thanks, guys, for coming on and filling in for the Kings.
Yeah, no worries. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right. Well, the Kings, they of course made the playoffs last season, had to deal with the Edmonton Oilers in the first round again, for the last, what, two seasons in a row. They've had to deal with the Oilers. I think if they want to make the playoffs,
Three at this
it's
point,
three
right?
now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh. Yeah, three seasons in a row they've had to deal with that team, and of course never got by them. So I think they want to, if they do make the playoffs again, they probably want to face a different team. But yeah, they're getting stuck in the first round lately. Otherwise, they're a pretty good team. They're out of their rebuild if they ever were in a bit of a rebuild there, and are one of the top teams in the Pacific now. So their forward group is largely coming back the same. They did get rid of Pierre-Luc Dubois in the offseason. I mean, he didn't fit in at all. I mean, not even a little bit on the team after getting acquired from the Jets. And then they added a couple, had maybe bottom six type guys in Tanner Jeannot and Warren Foegele. But otherwise, their top group is pretty much coming back the same. So let's start with those forwards. And I'll start with you, Alex, on the couple bottom six additions they got in Warren Foegele and Tanner Jeannot. What do you think about those two guys? What are they going to bring to the team?
Yeah, I think they're both pretty good fits. With in Fogel's case, I think might have been a slight overpay, but he's someone who really fits well with what they're looking for, a third line guy who does what's needed and what is looked for in a third line guy, scoring a little bit and just that solid, steady guy who can play a little defense and just and sort of step up a little bit if needed. He's had, some really good playoff runs in the past, so he's a veteran who's got experience and knows what it takes to succeed and kind of make a career in the NHL and contribute in whatever he's asked to do. Jeannot is more of a fourth line guy, but he has potential. Obviously, he was the subject of a big trade not that long ago, which means teams are thought very highly of him at one point, and he's fallen off a little bit, but he has potential, and maybe a sort of change of scenery is exactly what he needs to kind of recapture that buzz and kind of mystique that he once had.
Yeah, the Lightning gave up a ton of draft picks to get him, and I mean, he is a really effective third, fourth line guy, but he hasn't really been up to the guy he was in Nashville, which prompted the Lightning to grab him. So it's going to be interesting to see how he kind of fits in the Kings system. I mean, how different it'll be under a new coach going into this season for a full season. It's going to be interesting to see how that kind of all goes, but I don't know if they're going to still continue with the 1-3-1 as they've been doing for the last bunch of years. But I mean, we'll see. We'll see how that all goes. William, what do you think about this forward group? I mean, like I say the top end is pretty much the same. But what do you think about the group coming into this season?
I think, as always, they have a pretty solid forward group. I think the biggest concern you have to have is when are the older guys going to start slowing down a bit? Like Kopitar is 37. I mean, you can't expect him to keep doing being him for that
Yeah.
long. Eventually, you have to have these other guys kind of step into that role. And I think they're starting to get that transition where you're going to get those Byfields kind of taking that role eventually. And then Philip Deneau is not super young anymore either. He's up to in his 30s. So it's just a matter of how long can these guys hang on. And I mean, the additions they made, I think you're looking at strong. They strengthened the team, certainly. I mean, Foegele had arguably his best year in the NHL last year, 41 points, 20 goals, and with the Edmonton Oilers.
Mhm.
So they're very familiar with him.
Yeah.
They know what he could do specifically in the playoffs. So I mean, doesn't hurt to bring him in. Jeannot is definitely interesting to me. I mean, that's a guy who 4 years ago played some games in the ECHL and
Yeah.
then got traded for a bunch of picks a couple years later. So I think adding these, I would say realistically low risk, potentially high reward guys is what can push your team over the edge. But there is also that chance that if Jeannot keeps putting up about 10 points a season,
Yeah.
that's not exactly ideal either.
True. Yeah. The thing is he's getting paid more. He's getting paid a lot more than what a fourth liner should be getting paid. But I mean, he is capable of scoring. It's just he hasn't done it since he was in Nashville. And we'll see if another change of scenery, see if that can recapture that. If it does, well, then it was a great addition. And if he can't, then that money's quite a bit being tied up in the bottom six, right?
It definitely is. And I mean, the thing is that's concerning about him is it wasn't even his entire stint with Nashville. It was just specifically the 21-22
True.
season
Yeah.
where he had 41 points, 24 of which were goals. 2022-2023, he only had 14 points in 56 games for the Predators. So even when Tampa Bay gave up all those assets for him, he wasn't doing great necessarily. But I guess ideally, if he gets even to like a 30-point guy, I guess that's fine. But I think they're definitely hoping he gets back to that 2021, 2022 pace. But I don't know if that's actually going to happen or not.
It could have been just a flash in the pan type thing where everything went his way, and
Yeah.
it's that happens. I mean, there are players that have that great one season and they just can't get back to it and get paid all the money for that one season. So
Yeah, it reminds me of when we were talking to the Sharks prospects at the rookie face-off. Quentin Musty said, I felt like I didn't play a great game, but everything was going in, and he scored a hat trick.
Yeah.
So sometimes you just get those days. So if you get string enough of them together, you can have a really great season. It just need to start seeing big performances from Jeannot consistently. But luckily, it's just a one-year contract, so if it doesn't go that well, they're they're okay.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not a Dubois contract here.
Yeah, I really was actually surprised they were able to get rid of him for that money. It was something that it was surprising that they were able to trade him. That's for sure.
I think that definitely helped save this franchise from going downhill very quickly. The fact that they were able to move that.
For
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, it was a bad contract. It was a bad fit, but certainly better to cut your losses on that soon rather than try to just force something that's not there for too long.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess kudos to Rob Blake for knowing his mistake and and trading it, right? So
Yeah, and being willing to admit it, because a lot of these executives are very stubborn, as we've learned over the years. So the fact that he was like, you know what, I made the mistake. Let's just cut our ties now before the trade protection kicks in. That was huge.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Alex, let's move to the defense. I mean, this group is again pretty much the same. They added Joel Edmondson as the only addition here. They're going to probably hope for a big season for Brandt Clarke, who's probably on his first full season in the NHL this season. Of course, Drew Doughty's still the mainstay on the top pairing. He doesn't seem to be slowing down. What do you think about this defense core going into this season?
Yeah, I mean, defense has always been the defining quality of this team, like in this current era with this core group of guys. That's what propelled them to that great start last year. Their penalty kill was fantastic, and that's obviously part of defense as well. I think it's very heavy on the top four. I think their top four guys are really solidified, and then who steps up out of like sort of the next three, like which two become that third pairing. It's going to be really interesting to watch. Edmondson, I think, was a rough signing. I think he brings some good qualities. Like he brings some leadership. If like he's a physical, tough player, which is always useful. But to sign him for 4 years, when I think he's more of a 1 or 2 year guy, I think was a bad idea. And so that contract might not age that well. But their top four is still really solid, and then trying to figure out who those next couple guys are going to be is the question mark we still have.
For sure. I mean, is Brandt Clarke going to be in the top four? I mean, it's looking like it on, I mean, some depth charts, but will he be able to kind of get all those minutes? I mean, he's going to have to get a lot of minutes. Jordan Spence is there too. I mean, he's also shown to be capable in the NHL too. So we'll see how that all plays out. William, you have any other thoughts on the defense going in for this Kings team? I mean, it is still a pretty good big strength of theirs.
It definitely is. And I think with Clarke, if he's not in the top four, I think you might as well just send him back to Ontario, get him that top time at least until we get closer to the postseason. Because they did also add Kyle Burrows. That was the
Yeah,
other option.
right.
So I would say ideally he's your seventh D, but I mean realistically, with how strong the rest of the defense is around him, if he's your bottom pairing right defenseman, I don't think that's an issue either. He's going to be a guy who, especially with some of these younger guys stepping into the lineup, he'll help kind of protect them, guide them. And realistically, he's the type of player I'm interested to see in the postseason if he gets any playing time, because I think his physicality, his just steadiness on defense would be interesting to see how he could perform at that level as well.
Yeah, Kyle Burrows, I liked when he was in Vancouver here. He really stepped it up whenever there were injuries. He was a great kind of guy that just came into the lineup and did his job. And he was probably one of the more physical defensemen that the Canucks had at that time. When Luke Schenn left, he kind of stepped into that role and played really well. So I think he could really have a role on this team as well. So for sure. All right, goaltending. This got a change. Darcy Kuemper was the guy they acquired in that Pierre-Luc Dubois trade, and then they also got David Rittich, who had good stretches of time last season as well. And then, of course, they've got Phoenix Copley too. So I mean, they've got pretty much three goalies right now. I mean, if you want to add in Eric Portillo too, I mean, he's in that mix as well. So, William, what do you think about this foursome of goalies, I guess?
Honestly, the last name you mentioned there is the one I'm most interested in. Portillo, of course, he hasn't had much pro time yet, but last season of Ontario, he was impressive. He looked really good at the rookie faceoff when he got an opportunity. And overall, I mean, he's a very underrated goaltending prospect. I think he has potential to be the guy who takes over when all these guys are no longer at the organization. I mean, Kuemper's 34, Rittich and Copley are both 32.
Mm-hmm.
How long do you want to keep going with that old goaltending? Of course, you're stuck with Kuemper for 3 years with his contract, but do we see maybe it's time to kind of push Copley and Rittich down, get Portillo up there as the backup, and then you have a pretty strong 1-2 punch at that point for the long run, I'd say. And then you can always kind of do what the Maple Leafs did last year with Martin Jones, just have these other guys ready to go if you ever need them. I mean, you never know. Like, it's one of those things where this goaltending could be really good, especially with the defense in front of them, or it could be what breaks down everything for this team. It honestly is very reminiscent of what the Maple Leafs had last season.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't really know what you're going to get with this. And I would say Portillo is the safest option in my eyes, which is weird because he hasn't played in the NHL yet. But I think he's the guy who, if he steps into this lineup, he could have the biggest impact.
Yeah.
Kuemper is going to be good, but for how long is the other question. Pretty much we have that question mark at every position. So you have Kopitar, Doughty, and Kuemper. Like, how long are these guys going to hold up? And then, of course, the two behind him, Rittich has his moments where he's great, but there's a reason he hasn't become a starter in the NHL long term. He can't sustain it. And then Copley's been pretty much the same thing. He's always been kind of that fringe guy where you never really know where he's going to be. So it's definitely going to be either a strength or a massive weakness of this team, but it's hard to tell which.
For sure. Alex, is goaltending the biggest question mark going into this season for the Kings? I mean, overall, their other two position groups are pretty good. It's this goaltending that's kind of it could be like William said, could be their biggest weakness, or the biggest strength, I guess. Is that the biggest thing going in?
It's certainly one of them. Yeah, I mean, I think we'll get to this more, I think, in the rapid fire round.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, I mean, the goaltending and sort of those young players stepping up on defense are the two big questions. And it's just an interesting situation to be a team that has expectations of making the playoffs, but then also having four different goalies who you argue deserve NHL time this year is a weird position to be in. Right now, I think it's a situation where it's kind of a 1A, 1B with Kuemper and Rittich, at least to start the season, but then you could definitely look for Copley and Portillo to get a chance at some point, especially if either one of those first two guys starts struggling or showing some inconsistency. That could be the thing to get one of those other guys the move, particularly Portillo, since he's the young up and comer. So yeah, it'll be curious to see how they they balance all that and sort of allocate the starts.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, Kuemper he was here in LA a few seasons ago. So, I mean, he is familiar with this team. And he was pretty good too. So, we'll see if he can maybe recapture that small amount of sample size that he had, well, we'll see.
And Kings fans know how quickly a goaltender can bounce back if they look at Jonathan Quick over in New York now. So
Yeah,
you
it's
never know
true.
what's going to happen.
That's very true. This is probably what they're hoping.
Yeah.
All right, looking at the Pacific Division, I mean the Kings were third in the division last season. I ended up, of course, playing the Oilers. Is Alex, is this where they are in the Pacific Division? Are they in that top three, or is the question marks kind of will they drop off from that top spot and have to battle for a wild card instead?
It's really close, and they're teetering right on that line between third in the Pacific and wild card. When you look at the rest of the Pacific, I think Vancouver and Edmonton are still going to be good. So I think they're probably still behind both of them. But then that third spot is a little bit up in the air. I would say they're around the same as last year. You've got Foegele coming in to replace Pierre-Luc Dubois, which I think is a better fit. Even if sort of purely in a vacuum, Dubois might be the better player, but Foegele I think just fits better on the roster. And then on the defense, Matt Roy is out, but you got Clark and Spence coming in. So I think it's about the same. And so I think they'll be sort of right in that same kind of area. And just figuring out obviously it's relative to the rest of the division, but I think I wouldn't be surprised to see them right back in that third. Maybe I don't think they'll jump up. I do think they'll still make the playoffs, but whether that's third in the Pacific or wild card spot is, I think, very sort of 50-50.
Well, you did just finish 1 point ahead of the Golden Knights. So, I mean, they
Right.
were
Yeah.
almost in that wild card spot last season, too. So, I guess they probably be maybe around the same, too. William, do you agree with that? Is that where the Kings are?
Yeah, I would agree with it for the most part. I will say one thing I could see is I don't think anybody going into last season expected Vancouver to be as good as they were. So there's always that possibility they come down to earth a little bit more and settle in like around 100 points, 105, like in that range rather than 109, which would put the Kings and Golden Knights in that striking range. So I think Edmonton's going to be Edmonton. You don't really have to worry about them dropping off, but I really do see pretty much anywhere from second to fourth in the division being pretty realistic at that point.
Yeah, the Canucks are going to have a tough start to the season, it seems, too, because Demko's hurt. Now Joshua is going to be out who knows how long now at the beginning of the season. So, I mean, yeah, there could be some maybe slow start for the Canucks, and that could take away those points, like you said, and maybe drop them off to a 104 rather than the 50 wins, less than 50 wins this season. So we'll see. All right, let's get to our quick fire round here. And I mean, we did mention the biggest storyline is probably that. William, is the biggest storyline goaltending for you for this team going into the season?
Honestly, no. I would say it's the other thing we talked about, which is just age. I mean, we've saw it, for example, of Alexander Ovechkin at the start of last season, where age finally caught up with him a little bit. I mean, that's one thing that nobody can really control. And I think eventually it's going to come for Doughty. Eventually it's going to come for Kopitar. And that's going to affect this team massively. Just the question is when? Is this the season? Is it next season? Is it a couple years down the line? It's going to come eventually. But is this the season? And if it is, how's that going to affect this team?
Alex, is that your biggest? I mean, you mentioned two of them, but what's the biggest one for you?
I think the biggest one is the defense and who replaces Matt Roy as that second pair guy. Is one of those, does Clark or Spence or some young player take a leap? And in now with more experience and more NHL time, getting that, in Clark's case at least, that full season experience, is someone able to fill that void that's left by Matt Roy departing. And because like we were talking about earlier, defense is such a huge part of this team's identity that they need that to stay solid, and they're going to need some young player to step up and do that. So seeing who it is, my guess would be it's Brandt Clark, but just figuring out who that is, I think is going to be the biggest thing to watch.
Yeah, the one thing Matt Roy brought a lot to the team, and there's a reason why the Capitals signed him because and he was in demand in the free agent market too. So that's going to probably be a big loss and see who steps up to fill it. All right, William, one or two breakout stars going into this season.
Now, there's the two that pop in my head. First one, Brandt Clark. I think if he's in the NHL full time, I almost wrote this in an article the other day when I did the recap for the game and played at the rookie faceoff, but I think he's already on that borderline of stardom.
Mm-hmm.
Like once he goes, he's going to go. And I don't think there's any slowing him down because he just makes everything look so easy.
Mm-hmm.
He really is a high-end talent player, and it'll be interesting to see what he can do once he gets going. The other one is a bit of a weird answer because technically he broke out last season, but I also see him going even further this season, which is Quinton Byfield.
Yeah.
I don't think we've seen what he's going to be, and I think this could be the season where potentially he gets near that point per game level.
Yeah, he did show quite a bit last season, but he does have a lot more potential in him to be that star. So yeah, I do agree with that one. Alex, what about you? Who's a breakout star for you this season?
Yeah, Clark. I mean, there's a reason we've been talking about him so much.
Yeah.
Spencer, we've been talking about him as well. One other person I would say to keep an eye on, we haven't mentioned yet, Akil Thomas. I think he is a guy. He got a brief taste of the NHL last year. Looked pretty good in like the few games he played, and I think like just seeing if he can, if as I would assume he's going to get a lot more time in the NHL this year, and seeing if he can take that jump and really establish himself as a full-time NHL player is going to be worth watching.
I like that pick too. I think he did have a good season when he was up. So we'll see what he can do in a full season, most likely this season. All right, bounce back. So William, who needs to bounce back from last season? Of course, the guy that would is gone. But
Yeah. 6 months ago, this question would have been a lot easier.
Yeah.
But I guess this is another guy we've already talked about. And even though he's not bouncing back from what he did with LA, be Tanner Jeannot.
Yeah.
I mean, you need to see more out of him, especially at the amount of money he's getting paid. If he puts up 15 points again, that's not good enough for what you brought him in for. So I think you have to get more out of him, and he has to have a bigger role than what he's currently projecting to have.
Yeah, that's a good one. Alex, what about you? Bounce back.
Yeah, I'll say someone who actually like just got a new contract today, I believe, Arthur Kaliev. He's a fantastic shooter, but I think the gap between his potential as a scorer and what he's produced so far is still really wide. So he has to reach that potential and start sort of stepping up and utilize that shot to its full effect, because he can be a really effective goal scorer for this team. So this season, that's something that I think the Kings are definitely going to look out for is trying to get him up to his potential, or they certainly hope that he can find another level.
Yeah, those two good choices there. All right, Alex, I'll stay with you. An X factor for this season. It doesn't, again, not a player, but it doesn't have to be a player. It can be a situation too.
Yeah, I think the X factor is sort of two players and a situation kind of for me. It's Phillip Danault and Trevor Moore as their secondary scoring pair. You've seen obviously the top line, Kuemper, Kopitar, Byfield guys like that. Like we know what they're capable of. But Trevor Moore, I think probably was the breakout star of last year for the Kings. And so can he keep that up? Is he going to be on the same line as Jeannot and sort of getting those passes with Jeannot feeding him? Can he maintain the success he had last year when he, I believe, led the team in goals? And so seeing if they can maintain the sort of the connection they had last year, I think is going to be really big for the offense.
Definitely. We know that top line's going to score. I mean, you'd think, unless Kopitar drops off this season, but we'll see. William, what about you, an X factor for this season?
I would say I'm going to go with a player here. It's Darcy Kuemper. I mean, if you get the Washington Capitals Darcy Kuemper from last year, you're not in great shape. Let's be real about that. An 890 isn't going to cut it here. But if you get previous LA Kings, Arizona Coyotes, and even Avalanche Darcy Kuemper, you're in great shape.
Yeah.
It's just is what we saw last season and partially the year before natural regression, or is it he didn't fit in a certain system?
Mm-hmm.
I would say, considering Washington changed coaches in between there, it's more than likely not just the system. But as we can see, Washington is starting to go down that curve where they're heading towards an inevitable rebuild once Ovechkin retires. So things are starting to get a little bit sloppier. They're not the team they used to be. And LA is obviously a strong defensive team, so that could kind of help any of his weaknesses. But if this is a goaltender who can give you a 920, you're in good shape. If he comes out and takes even further regression and you get like an 880, you're not going to be happy with that at all. And then you have to figure out how do we address the situation moving forward. So I think he's definitely the biggest X factor because he's basically going to either make or break the team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he probably would fall underneath the bounce back too. He needs to bounce back from last season as well. So, yeah, because the Capitals signed him to be that goaltender from before, and of course that didn't happen. And Charlie Lindgren played better than him and basically took his job. That's why they traded him. So, yeah, he's definitely a big X factor for this season for sure. All right, let's talk about some rookies and prospects. And I'll start with you, William, since you were just at the rookie face-off seeing some of these guys. So do you see anyone kind of surprising and making the lineup, forcing some decisions here?
I mean, we've kind of already talked about the two biggest ones, which are, of course, Brandt Clark. That's not a surprise if he makes the lineup. I think Portillo could be another one. Another guy who really impressed me, but I don't think he's there quite yet. If he was eligible for the AHL, he might get some NHL time this year, but that's Liam Greentree. He looked really solid to me. I really liked what I saw from him. He brings that physicality. He overall played really well, and he was really noticeable. And I mean, who can't use a 6'2" power forward?
Yeah.
You can always use one. And he really did seem like he could be on the verge, kind of like how last year Quentin Musty was for San Jose. Like he could do it, but is it the right time? Probably not. It's not very often you see a guy drafted 26th overall make it the NHL out of camp. So it's just kind of one of those things where we have to see. But I think if anybody's going to surprise, it'd probably be him.
Yeah, he was a good pick by the Kings in the draft. So, yeah, it's not surprising. He probably stood out. But again, a rookie tournament is different from the NHL.
Yeah, it all depends on what he's able to do here in training camp. And with it getting underway here momentarily, you never know how these things can go. I mean, obviously this was higher in the draft, but look at a few years ago when Cole Sillinger made the Blue Jackets as an 18-year-old. I mean, nobody really expected it, and he was able to pull it off. So you just kind of never know what's going to happen. And I would say realistically, any first round pick or any draft pick in general can make it at any time. You just never know.
Yeah, true. Alex, do you have anyone in mind, or is it those guys that could potentially surprise?
Those guys are all really good choices. Just one more person who I'll call attention to, just because he's played so well in the AHL when he's been down there, is a Samuel Foegele. He was, I think, second in the AHL in goals last year, but when you go by goals per game, he was far and away the leader because he played a lot fewer games and was still scoring at the same rate. And obviously, having that kind of goal scoring capability in the AHL suggests a lot of NHL potential. Obviously, it has to translate when the game, gets a little bit faster and things like that. But if you can score at that rate, teams are always going to be interested in you. So seeing if he can make an NHL impact this year and maybe make that right away. If he's good, like William was talking about, if he's good enough in camp, they have to at least give him a look. So that'll be worth checking out.
Yeah, that's a good choice too. And I mean, AHL's most of the time when they're scoring that at that clip, it does somewhat translate to the NHL, but there are guys that just do well in the AHL. They can't do anything when they get up. So we'll see if if he can do that. All right, William, anyone else that people should be watching this season outside of prospects that can make the team?
Well, I would say no matter what, you're going to have to keep an eye on the guy I was just talking about, Greentree. No matter where he is, keep an eye on him. He's going to be entertaining. I think Francesco Pinelli is another interesting player. And realistically, I'm obviously these aren't really prospects, but I'm curious how their depth guys do, like the Jack Stanicka, Glenn Godden. I'm just
Yeah.
curious how well they do at the AHL level, and if maybe they can kind of come up at some point and fill in some roles. I mean, I don't think you want them to be your fourth liners, but like in terms of injuries and things like that, it's interesting to see if they're able to just kind of build on things a little bit and maybe prove that they are NHL caliber.
Yeah. Stednika's been well, he's been in the Canucks organization very short time, but he's a guy that wasn't he was a prospect not that long ago, really, if you're thinking about it, but he hasn't really translated into what he should be. Yeah, it's a guy to watch for sure.
They
Alex,
actually have
yeah,
Oh, I was saying they have another one just like that too of Caleb Jones, who's currently
yeah.
slated to be in the AHL after how many years in the NHL? So that's another interesting person who just like this Ontario Reign team is going to be weird.
Right. Mix of veterans and guys that are on maybe that middle ground. We're not where they're kind of fit. Alex, you have anyone that everyone should people should be watching this season prospect wise?
Yeah, I mean, Green Trees is a great choice just because for all the reasons William was talking about. Obviously, you want to pay attention to your first round picks. He's certainly gonna be worth watching. There's a couple other guys to pay attention to, I think. Hampton Slukinski, another goaltending prospect, maybe kind of the next guy after Portillo. So sort of worth watching how he develops and what kind of playing time he gets. And then there's another interesting guy that I came across is Cone Zemmer. Young guy in Ontario, but and still has a long way to go, I think, before he makes the NHL. But a very interesting player who is a big guy, and I think one day could potentially like make an impact if he develops in the right way. Still a very raw prospect, but has his game could grow in an interesting direction, I think. So worth looking at his development.
All right, well, all good choices there for prospects. All right, let's talk about let's do a couple predictions here. Alex, who do you think is going to lead the team in scoring this season, forwards and defense? The forwards, I mean, it could be different. I mean, there are a few candidates here.
Yeah, I think Kopitar will be the leading point scorer. I think he is getting up there, but his game is just so steady and solid and not, dependent on like a ton of insane physical tools. Like so much of his game is about his mentality and his hockey IQ that I think he can sustain it for at least another season or two. So I would say he's still gonna be up there. I think leading goal scorer, I would say probably Adrian Kempe, because he'll be playing alongside Kopitar presumably a lot of the time and still getting those same opportunities. And for defenseman, I'll say Drew Doughty, like another veteran guy, but the guy who's gonna play on the power play a lot and gonna run a lot of the offense through him just because he's so trusted within that organization. So I would expect him to still be the number one guy there for a little while longer, even if he is getting up there in age.
There's a guy that just doesn't seem to slow down. I mean, even though it doesn't matter what age he is, he's gonna probably play until into his 40s. I don't know. It seems like it. William, do you agree with that? Is that who's gonna kind of lead the way?
I would say I agree with Doughty for sure. In terms of goals, my idea is Kevin Fiala. I think if he just really it takes him one hot streak and he's right there. Trevor Moore led last year, so I think by 2 goals. So I think realistically, I expect Fiala to be over 30 this year. In terms of points, based on what I said earlier, if I'm right about the breakout, it's going to be Quentin Byfield.
Yeah.
So, because if he's at that point per game level, he'll be above everybody else. So, I guess going with that, that's my prediction there. But I would say if I had to go with a safe answer, it'd be Adrian Kempe.
Yeah. That's a good one. I mean, those guys are probably going to leave, but I mean, Byfield, if he does break out, he could definitely be in that position too. All right, let's finish the show. William, a bold prediction or hot take for the Kings this season.
Well, I guess I just had one. So, so there's that. I would say the bold prediction is that, well, something else we kind of talked about. I think by the end of the season, Eric Portillo might be in that backup role, which looking at it now, when you have Rittich and Copley in his way, doesn't seem very likely. But I think because he had, I believe, a 916 last season at the AHL level. if one of your goaltenders is struggling, and say he's at like a 930 this year in the AHL, how do you not move him up?
Yeah.
Like it's one of those things. So I think he's gonna get off to a hot start at the AHL level, come up, and then once he comes up, I don't think there's any looking back for him.
Yeah, I mean that's a good thing. I mean, it would create a lot of problems with the goaltending if he does, but I'm sure the Kings would welcome it to have a guy that they could kind of rely on for a while, right? So
Yeah, and I mean with Rittich and Copley both being in the last year of their deal, I mean of course Kuemper's contract isn't great, but with Portillo still on his ELC,
yeah,
I mean you're paying him I think about 6-ish million for your goaltending, which isn't terrible for the starter and backup if you have Kuemper and Portillo.
yeah.
The issue will come, I believe, probably the last year of Kemper's contract when now it's like, okay, now I have to pay Portillo as well, because I'd imagine by then he might move into that starting role. But
Yeah.
that will definitely be interesting in the long run. But for this year, I would say the next couple of years, it'd actually be a bit of a blessing for the Kings. Save some money there.
For sure. Alex, what about you? Bold prediction for this season?
Yeah, I mean we've talked so much about, how they just keep running into Edmonton in the playoffs. So I think my prediction is that if they make the playoffs and their first round series is not against Edmonton, they will win it. They will get that break they've been looking for and at least make the second round. I think their team and their style is very well suited for the playoffs just because it's so heavy on defense and shutting down opposing power plays and things like that. But just Edmonton has just been a really tough matchup for them, and they just sort of don't, yeah, like they don't match up with them very well. So I think there'll be a psychological aspect to it if they manage to avoid Edmonton. It'll be like, finally, thank God, we will actually have this opportunity where we're not up against this really bad matchup for us, so that'd be big for them. So I think you can look for them to win a non-Edmonton playoff series this year. And I think it's kind of one of those situations where they kind of have to, 3 first round exits in a row. There was all these rumors about, do they make an executive change with Rob Blake? Do they bring Jim Hiller back with all this offseason? And they decided to keep both of them around. So I think it's kind of a make or break time for both of those guys, and sort of a now or never situation this season. So it can be big for them if they do that.
Yeah, that way they can lose to Edmonton in the second round.
I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying first round. We'll see.
That's true. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, there's a chance they would beat the Oilers again in the first round. I mean, that 2-3 thing, or I don't know. I guess if the Oilers win the division, then that'll probably fix that. But
Yeah,
I mean, unless the Kings then drop the wild card, and I mean
that could happen too.
But
well, here's a question for you though. If you were a player on this Kings team, would you rather go up against somebody else or get Edmonton and finally take them out? Like, I think, which one would you prefer? I think personally for me, if I was on the Kings, I'd have more motivation if I get Edmonton because we could finally beat them.
It's true. Yeah, that is very true. It's like the exercise of demons, which is pretty much the same as what the Canucks had to do with Chicago so many times, meeting them in the playoffs, finally beating them. So, and that propelled them to the Stanley Cup final. So, you never know, right? So we'll see.
And like now I'm thinking of like when the Capitals finally beat the Penguins in 2018 and used that as the trampoline to win it all. So yeah, I know it's gonna be interesting to follow, especially like if it like in like the final stages of the playoff race, like if they're in position to meet each other again, how the last couple of weeks of the regular season play out.
Yeah.
And
all right, well, we'll see. We'll see.
A little bit of an off-topic question here for you, Matthew.
Yeah.
But when they did the realignment, how much did you want Chicago to go to the Eastern Conference?
A lot. It was something I wanted to happen. Yeah, it wasn't. I mean, now it's not as big, but at that time, yeah, for sure. I mean that team was just, yeah. All right, well, the Kings are going to be an interesting team again this season. We'll see. I think the biggest question for me is if they stick to that 1-3-1 system or they're going to change it, because I would want them to change it because playing against them was not nice when with that 1-3-1. Not very exciting hockey to watch. So we'll see if that's a change in their system going into this season. But make sure checking out everything at thehogwriters.com. We do have a writer that covers the Kings now. So he'll hopefully be on this preview next season if he's still around here. But make sure checking out all the stuff that he puts out on the hockeywriters.com. We also got the Substack you can take a look at. And of course, all the other previews on the YouTube channel. Make sure checking all those out as we continue our countdown to the regular season. But until our next preview, whenever that is, we will see you next time.